I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed." Following that, my mother-in-law added, "Useless ones should just get divorced and leave." Uttering such harsh words, my father-in-law joined in, realizing the situation. He yelled, "A wife who can't have kids doesn't belong in our family. Just divorce Ryan and let him marry Agnes." Silently standing there, I was speechless. It was the first time in my life I felt so utterly miserable. But at the same time, a firm resolve solidified within me. The time had come for me to fight back. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze in shock. They probably thought I'd be hurt and on the verge of tears. Defying their expectations, I smiled broadly and said, "I'm already divorced, you know, and that woman." At my words, my parents-in-law and Ryan gasped in disbelief. Uttering pitiful voices, they trembled as they faced this astonishing truth. My name is Margaret, a 31-year-old part-time housewife. I married Ryan 3 years ago, but we don't have any children yet. At 28, when we got married, I was a full-time employee poised for a promising career path. If I continued working, I wanted to build my career until I was 30 and then, once childbirth and parenting had settled, return to a job-friendly environment. Ryan understood this, and we agreed to start trying for a baby after I turned 30. When the time came, having seen a friend struggle with infertility, I decided to get tested just in case. The result revealed my infertility, leading me to switch to part-time work to focus on treatment. Ryan worked in a real estate company, and his take-home pay was more than enough for the two of us. Since we could save a little every month, Ryan was okay with me switching to part-time work. But that's when my nightmare began. Once he knew about my infertility and my change to part-time, Ryan's attitude completely shifted. He had been kind before, but suddenly he said, "I'm a full-timer, you're part-time, so you should take care of all the household chores. Without my income, we can't even afford infertility treatments, let alone live comfortably. To avoid stressing me out, you need to handle all the housework perfectly." I was good at housework since my days living alone, so it wasn't too painful at first. But Ryan started nitpicking over everything. If the room was even slightly messy, he'd yell, "You're lazy. How can a housewife live in such filth?" And if the dishes weren't washed right after a meal, he'd say, "A woman who procrastinates like this isn't cut out for family life. But work more, earn your keep. There's remote work and stuff, right? You could find something. But remember, all the housework is still your responsibility. You're part-time, I'm full-time." At this time, I was still reeling from the shock of my infertility, thinking it was all my fault. I wanted to create a relaxing environment at home for Ryan, who was tired from work, so I tried to meet his expectations. Looking back, I realized I was just giving in to him, telling myself it was just patience until we have a child. I hoped that once we had a child, Ryan would return to his kinder self. Clinging to this hope, I continued juggling part-time work, housework, and infertility treatments. But the strain took its toll. I fell ill, the treatments weren't going well, and our relationship worsened. Gradually, I couldn't keep up with the housework and became more emotional. "You can't even get pregnant and still act all high and mighty. If you don't want a divorce, listen to me," he said, looking down on me. From then on, even a simple request to put his socks in the laundry basket was met with a shout of, "Shut up." I was just trying to make a point, but his contempt made me feel miserable and unsure of what to do next. He started treating me not as a wife but as a convenient woman or a servant. My spirit withered under this treatment. A year passed in this way without a child, and the gap between us remained. This year since becoming part-time and starting the treatment seemed to fly by, yet it was the most difficult time of my life. However, recently there's been a change. Ryan suddenly became kind, not just a little but a significant shift. It was as if he was a different person, showing increased concern for me. For instance, when infertility treatments weren't going well and I was feeling down, Ryan asked, "You okay? How about I make dinner tonight? I'll whip up your favorite beef stew." It was a mix of happiness and suspicion. After looking down on me so much, this sudden kindness felt like he had a hidden agenda, making me doubtful. So I casually asked Ryan, "What's up? Anything good happened recently?" He relaxed and said, "Yeah, work's going great. I had selected for a big project, but I might be away from home more as I need to have more meetings with the team." Up to this point, it was fine. My physical burden lessened, and Ryan's career success meant a secure future. Accepting his kindness without suspicion would mean no trouble. But there was one thing bothering me. Recently, Ryan had been overly curious about my activities. I asked him, "What's up with you lately? You used to be so uninterested in what I was doing." Suddenly, he snapped, "What's wrong with wanting to know about my wife's activities, Margaret? Are you doing something behind my back that you can't tell me?" His reaction seemed odd to me. Maybe he was being nice to cover up something he couldn't tell me. A recently divorced friend had told me about her husband becoming nice just before she discovered his affair. So I started suspecting Ryan's infidelity and began observing his movements. While he kept track of my schedule, I noticed a pattern. Ryan regularly went out for drinks on Tuesdays and played golf on the second Sunday of every month. He'd answer normally about other days, but on those specific days, if I asked where he went, he'd get angry, saying, "Damn it, stop nagging me, you're so annoying." It was suspicious. I grew more convinced Ryan might be cheating and decided to take serious action. A few weeks later, needing a break from this covert battle, I went on a little trip. It was a 20-minute drive from home to a cafe that had recently opened and caught my interest. Despite hearing about long lines, I didn't mind waiting alone, so I went there and waited for my turn. That's when I bumped into my sister-in-law. She's a 29-year-old cheerful and kind daycare worker, 2 years younger than me. She always looked up to me like a real sister, and I adored her like my own sibling. When I greeted her, my sister-in-law was startled and looked me up and down in a way she never did. Confused by her strange behavior, I tilted my head. "What's wrong?" Snapped out of it, my sister-in-law blinked, and after a moment of silence, she brightened up and said, "Margaret, let's have lunch together." So we changed the number of people on the reservation and sat together after waiting for several minutes. During lunch, my sister-in-law told me an unbelievable fact that left me speechless and unable to eat. After lunch, instead of going home as planned, I decided to change my plans. I decided to visit my parents-in-law's house with my sister-in-law. Their house is about a 30-minute drive from our apartment, where I currently live, so I don't usually stop by. My parents-in-law aren't exactly fond of me, so I don't see them often, only during the holidays or for memorial services. This would be a rare visit. It was just a little over 10 minutes from the cafe. My sister-in-law, who lives alone and only occasionally visits home, usually informs my mother-in-law when she's coming. But today we decided to go there without notice. It's the second Sunday of the month. Ryan should be at his usual business golf, but strangely, when we arrived at my parents-in-law's house, his car was there. My sister-in-law unlocked the door, and as we entered, I whispered a small hello. My mother-in-law came out and asked with a puzzled look, "What's Margaret doing here?" Her tone was clearly unpleasant just because I visited. She took this attitude simply because a daughter-in-law dropped by the house. I barely managed to hold back a sigh. Then, from the back of the house, I heard voices. Ryan and a woman appeared. Ryan looked shocked for a moment, but the woman cheerfully said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Agnes, the future wife of Ryan." As I stood there dumbfounded, my sister-in-law, with an angry expression, confronted them. "Hey, what's going on here? Explain this." Ryan sighed deeply, then looking down on me, he said something shocking. "I'm remarrying a new wife. You're no longer needed." Following that, my mother-in-law added, "Useless ones should just get divorced and leave," uttering such harsh words. Oddly, I was the only one who remained calm and rational, in contrast to my trembling sister-in-law who seemed both angry and sad. Meanwhile, Ryan, Agnes, and my mother-in-law looked down on me without any sign of remorse. Then my father-in-law, hearing the commotion, came in and quickly understood the situation. He yelled, "A wife who can't have kids doesn't belong in our family. Just divorce Ryan and let him marry Agnes." "Dad," my sister-in-law shouted, trying to stop him, but I slowly raised my head. It was time for my counterattack. Seeing my expression, everyone but my sister-in-law froze. They probably thought I'd be hurt and on the verge of tears, but defying their expectations, I smiled broadly and said, "I'm already divorced, you know." My parents-in-law and Ryan were astonished. They could only utter a pathetic "ha" in response. I had the urge to reveal Agnes's true identity right then and there, but instead, I sighed and said, "Ryan, do you remember the recent fuss you made about divorcing me? You even filled out the divorce papers. Those papers were signed by you, so I filled in my part, submitted them, and consulted a lawyer. Whether you realize it or not, we're already divorced. We're not a couple anymore." Ryan seemed to recall that incident and lost his previously composed demeanor. His eyes darted around, clearly showing his agitation. A few days ago, Ryan and I had an argument, and in a fit of rage, he signed the divorce papers and threatened me. The argument was over something trivial. I had simply asked him again where he goes every second Sunday. It was time to get to the heart of the matter. Ryan, red-faced, yelled, "You're always asking such things. Do you want to tie me down? I'm not having it." It was his usual angry outburst. I pointed out that it was strange for him to get so worked up just because I asked about his whereabouts on the second Sunday. Still, Ryan kept nagging and stormed out of the house. Later, he came back with the divorce papers, filled his part out hastily, and pushed them at me, saying, "I can divorce you anytime." When I asked if he really intended to divorce, Ryan nodded firmly, so I secretly filled in my part and kept the papers in my bag, ready to submit at any time. They were like a talisman, a magical paper that could end my marriage with Ryan if anything happened. Today, after a shocking conversation with my sister-in-law and reaching my limit, I stopped by the office to submit the papers before visiting my parents-in-law. Ryan, hearing this, said, "That was just a threat. I didn't mean it." But my sister-in-law retorted, "You signed it yourself, saying you could divorce anytime. That clearly shows your intent." Ryan fell silent again. I sarcastically said to Ryan, "So we're practically no longer a couple." Happy now, he opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, my mother-in-law interjected with a smug look, "Oh, is that so? Well, divorcing you was always the plan, so that's fine, isn't it?" My father-in-law seemed to agree with her, nodding his head. From their perspective, my divorce from Ryan was inevitable sooner or later, so they thought, why not now? Their true feelings were evident, suggesting that the divorce was a positive outcome for Ryan anyway. Standing next to Ryan, Agnes was also just smirking annoyingly. Noticing this, Ryan chuckled slightly and said, "Yeah, that's right. Our divorce is the first step towards me being with Agnes." It was a skin-crawling statement. Our younger sister-in-law looked embarrassed by this scene, maybe ashamed of these four. For me, holding back laughter at this foolish family and Agnes was a challenge, ignoring their triumphant looks. I operated my smartphone and showed them a photo. It was clear evidence of Ryan and Agnes's affair, pinpointing the place and time in just one shot. "I didn't file for divorce on a whim," I told Ryan. "I've gathered all the evidence of your affair from the start." Seeing him gulp at my words, I glanced at him as Agnes suddenly burst into laughter. Frowning, I looked at Agnes as she blurted out, "So you've thoroughly investigated me too? That woman you almost mentioned, I guess you figured her out. Were you going to reveal that she's pregnant? Too bad. Ryan and his parents know it and deliberately let me stay here." Hearing this, our sister-in-law was shocked. She had been told by Ryan and their parents that we were divorced when we met at the cafe. The reason for the divorce was particularly shocking. They said I was terminally ill with little time left and that I initiated the breakup. They seemed tearful and surprised by my sudden appearance at the cafe. My sister-in-law thought she was hallucinating, hence her strange behavior, which she apologized for. Hearing their story, I was appalled. Ryan had lied about separating from his wife due to a made-up illness. He told his sister, "Margaret is now despairing in life, so please don't contact her and accidentally upset her." Believing this, my sister-in-law refrained from reaching out to me. However, upon returning home, she was surprised to find a strange woman living there whom my parents-in-law introduced as Ryan's new wife. Until now, my sister-in-law realized she had been deceived, but she was hearing for the first time about Agnes's pregnancy. In response to Agnes's smug attitude, I burst out laughing. After my laughter subsided, I spoke to a stunned Agnes. "Of course, I knew you were pregnant. My detective had already clued me in, but I figured Ryan and his parents living here with you must know too. So I brought something even more interesting," I said, and the atmosphere immediately tensed. Everyone held their breath in a hushed silence, wondering what revelation was coming next. Agnes looked at me anxiously, waiting for me to speak. When I finally did speak, the quiet was shattered and the situation took a drastic turn. What I wanted to say is, the child you're pregnant with, Agnes, it's not Ryan's. It's from another man. Immediately, sweat formed on Agnes's forehead and her expression became rigid. Ryan, speechless, could only mutter, "What?" His parents, confused, slowly turned their gaze towards Agnes. Before our marriage, I had spent my savings on a detective, asking them to gather conclusive evidence and information that would be advantageous for me post-divorce. Normally, it would have been just providing photographic evidence, but I requested several extras. I wanted photos that clearly showed the date and time, and detailed investigative reports recorded at every step. In fact, I had already gathered enough evidence to confront Ryan and demand alimony on the day of the divorce petition. I knew why he only went out on Tuesdays and the second Sunday of every month. Those were Agnes's days off at her job. Ryan dug his own grave by writing the divorce papers himself, handing me an unexpected win. I had enough evidence to corner Ryan, but I thought it was too early. The detective had mentioned a dark shadow lingering around Agnes, so I asked for a more detailed investigation into her. It turned out she was indeed pregnant, and Ryan knew about it. This was somewhat expected. However, Agnes insisted on going to the doctor alone, stubbornly refusing to bring Ryan along. He seemed indifferent, but Agnes had a clear intention: to keep her other boyfriend, a married man with kids, from suspecting anything. It turns out the child is definitely his. This married man, unable to be with Agnes due to his family, agreed to cover all costs for prenatal care, childbirth, and even pay a lump sum child support to end their affair. The agreement was that once the baby was born and if a test confirmed it was his child, he would pay child support and settle their relationship. That's why that man always accompanied Agnes to the hospital, leaving no room for Ryan to get involved. Ryan, used to me attending fertility clinic appointments alone, didn't suspect anything different. I had collected evidence of Agnes going into the clinic with another man and even had decisive audio data, all stored on my smartphone. I presented all this evidence right there. Agnes's face gradually turned pale and her hands trembled slightly. Ryan, filled with anger, confronted Agnes, yelling, "Did you deceive me?" His parents were doing the same. I thought it was too much to gang up on a pregnant woman, so I intervened. "Enough. You're all embarrassing. You're all just as bad." Ryan, who cheated, his parents, who condoned it, and Agnes planning to divorce Ryan and raise another married man's child. All of you are behaving disgracefully. This is nothing but a low-level quarrel. After my outburst, everyone fell silent, unable to respond. There was no turning back now. I was resolved. Knowing Agnes's shocking secret, these people were unlikely to live together anymore. But I couldn't forgive Ryan for looking down on me while I was struggling with infertility treatments and then pretending to be kind to avoid suspicion after his affair. I've divorced Ryan, and I'm going to make sure you all pay for your sins. Agnes, you now have to raise 2 children alone, but you brought this upon yourself. So face the consequences. When I said this casually, Agnes turned even paler. "You knew I had another child? How? Where did you?" she stammered, unable to finish her sentence. Ryan and his parents furrowed their brows even deeper as I started explaining. For clarity, Agnes is a single mother, but her older child is being raised by her parents. They gave her some money, but with another child coming, things will change. Her parents are getting older, and she's been looking for a man to act as an ATM to help with childcare. I have evidence of her laughing about this with friends. Realizing that the term ATM was a veiled reference to himself, Ryan looked hurt, though he had no right to feel that way. His parents were flustered, and his mother, losing her earlier composure, said in a panic, "So Agnes's child isn't our grandchild? Then there's no reason for her to stay in this house. Leave right now." Agnes, in her desperation, started making excuses. "No, it is Ryan's child. Please believe me." But my sister-in-law, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Now you think we'll believe that, Agnes? Don't you realize the mess you've made of people's lives?" Agnes fell silent at her sharp words. Then my sister-in-law dropped another bombshell. "Aren't you the mom of the boy who goes to our nursery? The one always dropped off by his elderly grandparents. His name wouldn't happen to be Jason, would it?" Agnes's eyes widened, and though she opened her mouth to respond, no words came out. Her silence confirmed my sister-in-law's suspicions. Shocked, my mother-in-law collapsed on the spot while my father-in-law looked between us, frantic. It was time to wrap things up. I presented Ryan with an ultrasound photo and said, "Thanks to fertility treatments, I'm pregnant with your child. I was going to tell you soon. But then the morning sickness got worse and your affair became certain. But make no mistake, this child is yours. We won't live together, but I expect you to pay child support in full." Ryan looked despairing, but his brazen mother raised her head and started, "If you're having a child, you're still fit to be his wife. We were just misled by this woman. Apologize, and Margaret, please stay." I ignored my mother-in-law and turned to leave. When she kept calling after me, I turned back just once. "What are you doing?" You never liked me from the start. When you found out Agnes was pregnant with Ryan's child, what did you do? Your audacity knows no bounds. Stunned by my retort, something I'd never done before, my mother-in-law looked down again. My father-in-law, perhaps realizing their folly, said nothing more. I had already decided I didn't need to be recognized as their daughter-in-law, especially since they had discarded me. As I stepped outside, our sister-in-law apologized repeatedly, asking if there was anything she could do. I replied, just make sure they don't flee. I'm going to keep my distance from Ryan and communicate through a lawyer. And from now on, let's keep in touch as friends. She looked surprised but then nodded, saying, let's get through this together. Later, I hired a lawyer and went through the division of property. They whined about not being able to pay the substantial amount. But when I said I'd pursue this to the end in court with no mercy, they reluctantly agreed. As for Agnes, her affair with the married man came to light, leading to a heated argument. The turmoil grew too large, eventually reaching his wife's ears, and things did not end smoothly. Agnes, in desperation, turned to her parents for help. Naturally, they were furious with her and dragged her to us to apologize. After giving birth, Agnes will have no choice but to work tirelessly from dawn to dusk, unlikely to ever have the chance to engage in infidelity again. Despite having children, Agnes had been irresponsibly carefree, but now her parents control all her earnings, leaving her no room for stress relief. Having lived selfishly until now, she should start living for her children. Meanwhile, Ryan's fate turned out to be a mess as well. He eventually had to sell his family home to raise child support. Now he's living in a cramped, rundown apartment with his parents, barely getting by. I initially agreed to let him pay child support in installments, but as expected, he fell behind, thinking he could get away with it, probably based on something he read online. He was mistaken. I had warned I would be relentless. I immediately took legal action, enforcing payment through the courts. This led to his employer finding out about the divorce and his child support delinquency. His previous actions of leaving work early under the pretense of supporting his wife's fertility treatment, only to spend time with Agnes, also came to light, subjecting him to scorn. Eventually, he quit his job and paid the child support in full with a loan, plunging him into a lifetime of debt. Ryan's parents, too, were caught in the fallout. Now Ryan works solely to pay off his debts, and his parents, unable to enjoy a comfortable retirement, had to return to work. Their daily irresponsible arguments, blaming each other, even led to the police being called for being a neighborhood nuisance. Now they're quietly working to manage their debt, complaining as they do. As for me, I went back to my parents' house, apologized, and decided to live with them for a while after the birth. With their support, things started to look up. Soon, my former employer offered me a full-time position again. My sister-in-law, working at the daycare, agreed to take care of my daughter, giving me some peace of mind. Now, as a single mother living independently from my parents, I'm managing well. Thanks to the support and kind words from those around me, I've resolved to cherish these invaluable relationships and raise my daughter to be a wonderful person.
Hey there, I am a woman in my 40s. I've had my license as a real estate agent for more than 10 years. People often tell me I'm a great real estate agent. People tell me I'm a good real estate agent. That doesn't mean I can tell you how much a house will go up or down in value. But based on my experience and careful research, I can tell by looking at the cadastral map what the land is worth now, how it could be developed, and how the land's surroundings could be used to make money. I can then predict whether the land's value will go up or down because of these factors. Making a judgment would be a better way to explain it. In any case, I've used these skills to help my in-laws when they were in trouble. My marriage was great. Everyone in my family was nice, including my husband, my father-in-law, and my other in-laws. They all loved me so much, even though I was their youngest daughter-in-law. Because my father-in-law had been sick for a long time, I was taking care of his assets. My wife's dad owned a lot of land and needed the help of a real estate agent who knew what they were doing. I raised my father-in-law's properties by reinvesting in good places while I was taking care of his lands. I didn't mean to be greedy by taking his land for myself or anything like that, of course. I was lucky enough to live with these nice people as if I were family. One day, I was just enjoying my life when my mother-in-law showed up out of the blue. I thought his mother was dead because that's all I had heard about her since I met my husband. Something very strange happened. Why did her family and my husband say she was dead when she was still alive? It was strange how my husband and his father treated my mother-in-law after seeing her again after many years apart. Even though she was married and had given birth to my husband, they all talked about her like she wasn't there, even though she was a mother and wife. I asked my husband straight out, "Is there something I should know? Because I'm naturally interested. Why are you curious?" I said, "Of course, I'm interested. Strangely, everyone told me that your mother was dead, but she is still alive and well. She also acts like she just got back from traveling after being gone for decades. Then you and your family are treating her as if she's a non-existent person. So it's so confusing," I told her. He didn't say anything. Yes, that's right. Now that I think about it, you never held a service for her. That means you knew your mother, I said. Even if she died on the street somewhere, we wouldn't have done anything to remember her, he said. Oh my God, do you think that woman is my mom? Isn't she somebody else? Is she not your birth mother or the woman who gave birth to me? I had a question. She gave birth to me, but she's not my mother. We decided she wasn't going to be her mother after she left us and moved in with someone else while my dad was in bed recovering from surgery. The truth is that I'm glad she left us and ran away. I wish she wasn't my mother even before she left, my husband said. I learned that my in-laws, who were always getting along, had a lot of problems in the past after hearing my husband's sad story. They thought my mother-in-law was dead when she was still alive. I'll start with the conclusion. It was because my mother-in-law was a bad wife and mother. When he was younger, my father-in-law was very poor. Now he owns a lot of land and is very rich. He was so hungry that he would be lucky to eat one meal a day. His wife hated how poor they were, so she left her family behind and ran away at night. His mom was never a good person, even before she ran away. My husband's dad worked as a day laborer on building sites and was often gone looking for work in faraway places. Her young children did all the housework while she sat around most of the time. It was worse when my father-in-law wasn't home when my mother-in-law did bad things. The bad weather would make her mad, and when the food arrived cold, she would lose it. Then one day, my father-in-law got so tired at work that he couldn't stand up and walk anymore. He was unable to make a living. Then my husband's mother-in-law left, leaving her sick husband and young children who still needed her care. They were just making up words when they said she was playing at night because she really took anything valuable in the house. She didn't pay attention to her husband or her young children, who were pleading with her for food. As a mother, it wouldn't be easy for her to take all the money and important things, right? All of my in-laws and my father-in-law had lived as if my mother-in-law were dead. Given the circumstances, who could still care about my mother-in-law after she came back after decades? I could 100% understand how they felt. But I have more of a fear and dislike for my mother-in-law because she left her family in the past. My father-in-law was dying after a long illness when my mother-in-law finally came back after being gone for decades. She didn't ask about her husband's health at first, though she asked for something else. You must be the youngest daughter-in-law. So what I heard was that you're a real estate broker and you have been managing the family properties, right? She sought answers to. How did you understand that? You don't need to know how I knew. How many homes does my husband own? It was my turn. I'm sorry, I can't answer that. All of my father-in-law's businesses are in his own name. Get permission from my father-in-law if you're really interested. Have you heard from my husband? I told her that the one who is married to your father-in-law is me. I heard. I added, why aren't you my mother-in-law? She's not even the mother of my husband and his family. Ha! Since he was a kid, my youngest son has been stupid. So how did he get a wife like you? Hello, my name is Mary, and I'm your mother-in-law. You should be careful because I don't think someone like you could be my mother-in-law. I'm not that simple, she said. Are you being territorial right now? I inquired. You'll find out soon whether it's my being territorial or not, she said. After that, I began to look into my mother-in-law's life. It was clear that she had come back with a different goal in mind, to steal the inheritance. But I still needed to be sure every once in a while. People can turn over a new leaf at the end of their lives after having done many bad things. After a bad event, I had to make sure that my mother-in-law's comeback after decades wasn't a one-of-a-kind case, and that she wasn't trying to get the inheritance like I thought she was. Then I had to figure out how to keep my in-laws safe from her evil greed. Also, who said, perhaps turns inevitably. Like I thought she would be, my mother-in-law was just like that. It wasn't a surprise that my mother-in-law left her family and ran away at night over the past few decades. She had been cheating on other people and stealing from them her whole life. People thought it was cute that she lived off of other people's money and never paid it back, even though she had a criminal record for many frauds, because she was a terrible con artist. Once I knew who my mother-in-law really was, I checked to see if the cops or FBI had put her on a list of people they wanted to catch. She had just gotten out of jail, so she wasn't on the list yet. I felt bad that my mother-in-law wasn't on that list. You might say that's a mean thing to think, but no matter how nice you are, you couldn't say that I was mean after hearing my story. It was too bad that my mother-in-law wasn't on the wanted list, but I didn't have time to make plans to protect my in-laws and me from my greedy mother-in-law, who was after the estate. It was on the day that my father-in-law died that I carefully told everyone what I knew about my mother-in-law. My in-laws and I were more concerned with holding a proper service than with coming up with a way to stop my mother-in-law's greed. But I was worried the whole time my mother-in-law's funeral was going on because she didn't show up. My mother-in-law finally showed up on the day of the funeral. If the cops had a list of people they were looking for, I thought the problem would be fixed right away. She sneaked up on them and looked around, hoping to find a basket full of money bags that people had left to send their condolences to the family. "You can't find the gift basket, can you?" I asked her with a smile. Next, I was going to look at the envelopes for the guests and sort the cash. Then I would talk about the gift. "The basket went away though, didn't it?" she asked. "What are we going to do, right?" I looked down my nose at her. "That's you. You're the one giving it to them instead of me," she yelled. Would I have to leave that out without checking? I already knew what kind of person you were. You're so sneaky. How much money do you think that is? "I found out how much property my illness has left behind," I replied. "Oh, you didn't even go to the funeral because you were eager to learn that, right? So when I see you, maybe things will turn out the way I thought they would." "This is what I always do when I see you," I said. "Be quiet. I'm not a queer person. In the eyes of the law, I'm the first person in line. Everybody should hand everything over to me, no matter what you and my kids say. That probably won't happen, so you should know that," she warned. "Since you are married to my father-in-law, I promise you won't get any family money." I must admit that the warning I gave my mother-in-law was a bit of a trick. Even though my father-in-law was sick because he died so quickly, my in-laws and I were not able to make any plans for how to deal with my mother-in-law's greedy behavior. As expected, she started showing how greedy she was in order to get her husband's big inheritance all to herself. She sent proof to my in-laws right away that her marriage to my father-in-law was still legal. It showed that people knew about what was being sent to the court to get my father-in-law's will certified. Even though she had been tried many times for fraud while committing crimes, she knew a lot about how the court system worked, which helped her. I talked to a few lawyers on behalf of my husband and his family only. Everyone who worked as a lawyer gave the same answers. It is possible to keep your mother-in-law from getting the estate if you want to. That's great. They asked, "What's the way?" "You need to go to court. You need to ask the court to officially declare that the marriage between your father-in-law and mother-in-law is over. In this way, you can avoid a trial. It won't be simple," they said. Then, I replied, "That's probably why I said it happens. Since your father-in-law died, it will be even harder." They went on, "It's probably the same no matter which lawyer you meet, because the courts aren't very friendly when it comes to divorce and inheritance issues. One piece of advice I can give you is that most of the time, pretty good deals are made in this situation. It won't be as stressful as going to court. We don't want an agreement that most people would think is reasonable in this case, they said. Okay, I'll be back when the trial is over. When my husband and his family heard that lawyers thought it would be hard to fight with his mother, they were upset. People should always be able to get in touch with the government. But as a real estate agent who deals with land and property, I found court fights very strange and hard to predict. Additionally, regular people like my husband and in-laws felt like they had no choice but to carry the weight. My husband and his in-laws did not agree to a ridiculous deal, though, because they did not want to recognize their mother's role as their mother. In order to cheer them up, I gave them a small bit of hope. Why should our silly game make us the victims? Since I was the youngest daughter-in-law, I had all the responsibility, so I asked him to trust me and not worry. That's how my husband and his in-laws chose to get ready for court. Of course, I wasn't crazy about my confidence. There was only one thing that was certain. I was sure that my mother-in-law didn't have enough money to go to court over the estate. There would be no reason for my mother-in-law to send proof that she is married or try to steal money from the money basket at my father-in-law's wake if she could afford a lawyer and go to court. And this time, too, my mother-in-law never did anything to change my mind. As if to show that she couldn't afford to hire a lawyer to go to court, she broke into my in-laws' house with some neighborhood bad guys, made a scene, and demanded that the property's title be transferred. The marriage license and driver's license that my mother-in-law waved at us were her weapons. She had no shame at all. She yelled, "Look, aren't you crossed off as your dad's wife? He has never formally split up with me. Yes, is that right? If you know, you should first change how you feel." "You jerk," in front of my mom, she screamed. This is how I think my father-in-law would act if he were still alive. You stole everything valuable from the house and then went away, leaving your sick husband and young children behind. How dare you drool over a house? I replied, "Don't you think I know you're doing this because you're afraid to lose? You must have been told by the lawyers that I'm the most important person in the court case about the inheritance, right? So you must know something about the law since you've been to and from court. Okay, Mrs. X, convict. Is that not true?" I pushed back. That was a long time ago. It's possible to mess up. "How many times have you been convicted of a crime, huh?" she asked. I made a mistake. Who believes that? Did your friends who are in prison tell you that? But you're just that to our family. A liar, a criminal, a former prisoner, and a bad thief who didn't show up for decades, I said. Hey, lawyers said that. The marriage between you and my father-in-law will have been over a long time ago if you go to court. We won't have to pay you anything if that's proven. It's clear that you have no idea how hard it is to go to court because you talk too much. One thing I know for sure is true. You know how tough fights can get. You also don't have the money to hire a lawyer, which is why you're making a scene here. You want the fortune but don't want to go to court, I said. She stumbled and said, You, that's not us though. Remember that I am enough to carry that weight by myself. Stay away from our family if you don't want to see something worse. I'll be nice and buy you a hamburger, even a combo, if you promise that. Watch out, I said. Let's see if you can be the last person standing and laughing. The things I said to my mother-in-law were planned ahead of time by my in-laws and me as a way to get my mother-in-law to bring those thugs to put even more pressure on us. They did exactly what we asked them to do so we could get real proof. They smashed things in the house and said they would beat all of my in-laws. All of those moves were caught on camera by cell phones that my in-laws kept hidden. To get what we wanted as much proof as possible that my mother-in-law was violent and made threats. But my husband got home in the middle of the chaos. He had left to prepare the case against my mother-in-law at the lawyer's office a few hours before she and those thugs started causing trouble. He held a piece of paper in his hands and had a shocked look on his face. My in-laws were also stunned when they saw the piece of paper. It was clear that they were feeling completely hopeless. The paper was quickly taken away and read with great pleasure by my mother-in-law. My husband found my father-in-law's will after the fact. What was written in the will was shocking. The notice said that my mother-in-law would be inheriting a big plot of land. If things keep going this way, the family will see my mother-in-law as their mother, and it will give my mother-in-law the land and everything else they own. The land that was left to the family in the will was so big that it could fit several soccer and baseball fields. I changed my mind after carefully looking at the land register address and started to look for my mother-in-law. "Let me tell you the truth," I said. "It was all a lie to talk about the court case. Since you are legally married to my father-in-law, I really didn't think we would win the hearing. You're good at going into great detail about things that are clear. Still, wouldn't having the land and it will be enough to make all your dreams come true. How do you know I'm a licensed real estate agent? It's big enough to hold a lot of soccer and baseball fields," I thought. Then there was a small smile on my mother-in-law's face. Using my energy to help me, I kept convincing her. "To be honest, we don't think we can win the court case. However, if things go this way, you will also have to go through a lot of mental pain. Do not worry. Have you ever seen a rich person lose a case? It's something I've never seen before, doesn't it? This case will go all the way to the Supreme Court when it starts. Because of this, you won't be able to get your fortune until the hearing is over. First, I'm going to file an order to stop you from getting it. It will take at least a few years to go through all the requests to get the money. How could you wake up after all those years of worry when that great land was right there in front of you? What do you want to say? We should find a middle ground instead of going to court with each other. You will get the land and finish it instead. Please just write a note of promise. For the land written in the will, you will give up the rest of your inheritance and leave the rest behind. You can choose to take that huge piece of land right now without any trouble, or you can fight with everything you have for years and go to court to get everything written in the will. I want to stress again that the land mentioned in the will is huge, enough to fit many soccer and baseball fields," I said. "If I sell that much land, I will have enough money to live on for the rest of my life without having to work." My mother-in-law said, "That's a great deal, kid. May I just sign and put my thumbprint here? Without a doubt, it will happen, right? Should we get ready right away with the ink stamp?" she asked excitedly. "Now you're finally making sense." "This is something you should have done a long time ago," I told him. My wife's mother got very excited and signed a promissory note that said she would only inherit the lands listed in the will. She gave up her right to receive the rest of the estate and signed it with her thumbprint. We had it notarized. She had no idea what bad things would happen next. My wife's mother called a few days after she signed a note promising to take only the land listed in the will. When I talked to my mother-in-law on the phone, her voice was weak and whiny. "As planned, sweetheart. I just came to check out the land I inherited. There's a problem." "How is the land? How is it that there are mountains on all four sides? There aren't any roads or houses nearby," she said. To be polite, I asked, "Is there anything else?" "A hiker says this land is a refuge of some kind," she said. "So, you're in the mountains now." I had a question. "That's correct." She told him, "I think I must have come to the wrong place." "I think you went to the right place. What if the land is a safe place? A place where nature can be protected? Don't even dream about growth or anything like that. Be careful as you go down. You could hurt a natural habitat, and that would add another crime to your record," I told him. After I said that, I put the phone down. Finally, my husband, my in-laws, and I cheered. How did that take place? Weren't we sucked dry by my mother-in-law the day she broke into my in-laws' house with those thugs? When I looked at my father-in-law's will, I saw that my mother-in-law got a huge piece of land. I was sure that the land was my father-in-law's punishment and a threat to my mother-in-law. It was true that the land was big enough for many baseball and soccer fields. What was important was the type of land it was on. It was in the middle of nowhere, in the mountains, away from any roads or towns. There have been no plans for growth at all. It was an area for protecting nature that could never be built on. That being said, the market price was already very low. and there was no chance that it would go up. I knew that because I had been in charge of my father-in-law's land for a long time. There was no way we didn't know it, but everyone did. I even got my mother-in-law to agree to give up other inheritances at the end of the fake plea. When my mother-in-law got the land that couldn't be quickly sold and turned into cash, she couldn't even pay the estate taxes. She lost all of her money. As planned, she called me one more time because she was so desperate. The caller made threats and asked for money. She asked, "Now, what are you going to do?" I laughed. It was written down that she would give up her right to other inheritances. And I even had video of her breaking into my in-laws' house and threatening and harassing us. I told her in a mocking way that she could do anything to go back to jail. With a sigh, my mother-in-law hung up the phone and didn't answer again that day. Finally, there was peace between my in-laws and me again. In today's language, my father-in-law got even by working with his 4 sides and his daughter-in-law, who was a real estate salesman. Now I'm raising the value of the assets by taking care of my in-laws' fortune, which was a gift from my father-in-law. Because none of our kids are like my mean mother-in-law, my husband, and I have become great parents. How did she get away? Every year, she gets caught up in the Paladin mess because she hasn't paid her estate and land taxes on time. My in-laws and I had dinner together yesterday. All over again. I thought they were all very nice and kind people. That makes me miss my husband's dad even more. We love each other, and I want to spend the rest of my life living happily ever after. Father, please keep an eye on us. Please cheer for me and leave wise words in the area for comments. It really helps me when you click like and subscribe.